Welcome to the Leadership Bootcamp podcast. My name is Jeff Strauss. Today, I'm very excited to introduce to you Matt Paneitz. Matt is the co-founder and executive director of the Long Way Home Foundation, which envisions a world where every community has access to quality education built on the principles of sustainability, innovation, and environmental stewardship. Matt has served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala, which led to his founding of Long Way Home. And under his leadership, Long Way Home has built innovative schools and community infrastructure by repurposing waste and employing alternative construction methods, turning hundreds of tons of trash, including thousands of tires and bottles, into homes and classrooms. In 2008, Matt received the David Chao Humanitarian Award for his work in Guatemala, and in 2020, he was honored with the prestigious Sargent Shriver Award for Distinguished Humanitarian Service by the National Peace Corps Association, celebrating his sustained and distinguished contributions to humanitarianism. I'm delighted to welcome Matt to the Leadership Bootcamp podcast, where he shares his insights on how to build mission-driven teams, lead in complex cultural environments, innovate in resource-constrained settings, and sustain momentum when tackling systemic challenges. It was a really interesting conversation. Matt and I align on a lot of very practical and academic ideas, and I'm just really excited to bring Matt to all of the listeners and viewers of this podcast because Long Way Home Foundation is something that's very close to my heart, and I really believe that more people should hear about it. And so now I am very pleased to bring you Matt Paneitz. Matt, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you. How have you been?
Been well. Thank you very much. Great to be here today.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, the Long Way Home Foundation. Tell us about how this all got started, what you're passionate about, and why you're passionate about what you're passionate about.
Great. Well, I started Long Way Home after the Peace Corps. And, when you do the Peace Corps, you're out in the middle of nowhere for a long time, kind of by yourself on your own. And then after the Peace Corps, I moved back to America and decided I was going to live a normal life. And I enrolled in college, tried to finish my bachelor's degree, and got a job and tried to settle in. And one thing led to another, and I couldn't forget what I had seen in Guatemala, right? And what I saw was a lot of really extreme poverty. And I had never heard about that growing up. I was raised in a middle-class suburban East Texas town, and my family didn't have much money, so we didn't do any volunteering. There was no philanthropy. I have no history of that. And it's like, and when you're in the Peace Corps, you have a lot of time to read. And so I got to find out about why, Guatemala was experiencing the difficulties it was having. And all of that led to me while I was back in the United States after my Peace Corps service. I couldn't forget about it. I couldn't turn my back, and I felt like that's what I would be doing because I couldn't really unsee what I had seen or unknow what I knew then. And it led me to starting Long Way Home. And now we're, 20 years into that entire process.
That's an amazing story. A quick personal anecdote. Many people don't know this, but I spent some time living in Paraguay, and that experience showed me sort of what you're talking about as well. The disparity between the lower class and the upper class. There's really rich and extremely poor. There's not really much in the middle there. So I recall living there and walking down my street, seeing homes of like corrugated steel, just like four walls and a ceiling with like a window cut into it for a family. So I identify with that very closely. Is that still the case? Do you still find that to be the case even after 20 plus years of infrastructure modernization, development, economic development, social development? Is it still the case where you find that major disparity there?
Yeah, and it may have gotten worse. As families grow, their pieces of property basically get smaller. So a family would have had, let's say, an acre, and then they have kids, and then they subdivide that piece of property, and then they subdivide that piece of property again. And so, in the midst of that, there hasn't been any industry that has developed. So, that middle class that might provide some type of social service net doesn't really exist, right? And so, yeah, there are still, it seems like, as many people who are low income now as there were whenever I started. Now, of course, because of what we've done, some people are in a better position, but we're talking millions of people where we've probably had an effect on tens of thousands. We're not into the having had an effect on millions of people yet.
Yeah. And that's where we want to go with Long Way Home. Is that right?
That's where I would like to see this go, and I feel like we're not terribly far from that being the result of our work. There's a couple of really, really big steps coming up, and I'm really looking forward to those so that we can expand our impact.
That's amazing to hear. Has the political infrastructure, support mechanisms, things like that in Guatemala assisted the Long Way Home Foundation in its mission down there? Like, what's the community support like, and the tone for Long Way Home's work in Guatemala?
Well, at first, what we did was kind of keep our distance from politics, because politics in that area can get real tricky real fast. If you align with the wrong person, they can have expectations of you that you may not be able to fulfill. And so, although, there was no animosity, we didn't really team up with the local politicians necessarily, because they also are dealing with more than they can. They have less money than there are people who need their help. And so, we didn't go to them necessarily for help. But actually, in the last couple of years, we've gotten way more help than we ever have. So the mayor has said, hey, we'll pay for 2 of the teacher salaries at your school. And now they're in the process of getting our campus water. And lately, they've been buying materials because the new mayor has said, if you guys will do the labor, then I'll supply some of the materials. And we have a couple of agreements with them, and they're following through, and they've been really active in helping us, which has been enormous for us.
That's amazing to hear. How did that transition come about? If you kept your distance from the politics, which is totally understandable, what was the shift to getting their involvement?
Well, we have been there for 20-ish years. And so the team around us that's local, well, we've all gotten better, and they've gotten better as well. So, for example, the principal of our school, he's the one that's really leading all this, and he's from the area. And so he said, hey, I'm going to go to the mayor. I'm going to provide this opportunity for them. I'm going to do it the right way. I'm going to do, the paperwork that they're expecting and follow the actual steps, which I personally found kind of difficult because there's a lot of red tape, let's call it, in the area. And our principal has been really good at establishing these relationships, maintaining them, and then building them up from there. And then we're also doing everything that we say. Like if they give us materials, we don't, we build what we say, and we do it immediately, and the results are there, and everybody wins. So I think that has been, when you do what you say, people really get along with that.
It's very true. Yeah. You really do only have your word, really. Trust takes a long time to build, and it's very quick to be destroyed. So you really do have to stick to your word. And that's really amazing to hear. It sort of ties into a thought that I was having as I was reading about Long Way Home and reading about you, which is you've evolved, and ties in perfectly with the principal in your school. You've really evolved from somebody who's been a hands-on, and you're still very hands-on, but a hands-on decision maker to somebody who has enabled other people to be leaders, like the principal saying, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to drive this initiative with your support. What was that mindset shift like for you? And how, like, what types of behaviors do you think are important to have somebody in your organization be that type of person to go and say, I see a need, I want to do this?
Well, I would also like to stay in the program side of things rather than only the administrative side of things. And so, as I concentrate more time on developing lesson plans and training teachers and working with teachers, well, all that other work still has to happen. And so you can micromanage, and I do like to micromanage. It's hard not to sometimes, but what you do is you step back and you give other people a chance. And although it may not work out perfectly, you give people a chance to grow in the same way that I had a chance to grow. Like I started off really with no experience in administration or, any of what we're doing now and building a nonprofit organization. I had to learn it all and I made a lot of mistakes. If you give people a chance and allow them to make a few mistakes and then pick themselves up and then keep moving along, what you'll see is people start to have success. And that principal started having success, and it wasn't perfect at first, and he has brought other people along with him as well, because there are some people that I don't personally interact with on our team as much as the principal. But yeah, there's a lot of really skilled, smart people on our team that if given the opportunity, they can run with it.
How do you tell yourself that you need to step away? Right? As somebody who likes to be hands-on, you've really grown this organization. This is your organization that you have really, seeded, watered, and watched grow. Do you find it challenging to tell yourself, Matt, to step back for a second and let somebody else run with something? Or how do you talk to yourself about that?
Well, I don't much like the idea of me stepping back or, not trying to do everything. But the fact is you can't do everything. And I didn't even really have to step back necessarily. I could keep doing everything that I'm doing right now. And then people catch that. And then they go, okay, well, I'm seeing what's happening here. So I want some of that too. And so if we're all doing pretty well and we're all doing the most that we can, then other people catch that fever and they go, I want to do everything that I possibly can. I want to help out more. This is really catching on. And then other people jump in, and you don't even necessarily have to be doing less for other people to be doing more. And the people around me have decided that, I give them a chance in the sense that I go, okay, here's something that I would like to be doing myself. If you could take this on, that would be great. Then they have huge success with it, and then they build from that.
I really love that idea that you don't have to be doing less for other people to be doing more. I think that's what a great way, like what a great articulation of that idea. That's a really, really great way to say that. And I totally agree with you there. I tend to find it difficult to step away in my own work and let my team run with things. My team are excellent. And somebody on my team frequently gives me the feedback, like, put more stuff on our plate. Like, you don't have to do so much yourself. And so I really like the mindset of you don't necessarily have to be doing less for other people to be doing more. Was that like a revelation to you? Did you have a revelation about that at some point, or is just a reflection that you had as you were thinking about work?
Yeah. I mean, it's, one epiphany after the next when you're doing this and you're doing this the way that we are, because there is no perfect handbook for how to start a nonprofit organization, how to build it up. There are bits and pieces about how to do better with business and how to improve social media. And one thing is in this world, I'm kind of a dinosaur. And a lot of our employees are under 30 years old, and they are more familiar with what works now more than I am. And in our conversations, I it's one epiphany after the next because people are telling me things that I've never even considered, never even heard of. And then I go run with it and they run with it, and it goes into a space that I've never even considered, and they build it up into something that makes us flourish. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly exposed to how much I don't know.
I mean, I think that's a great exposure, right? Especially if you have uh, a an inquiry mentality, right? A lifelong learner mentality, that growth mindset they talk about. It's so important for not only for just general success, I think, in life, just as a human being, but particularly for helping grow other people and grow your own business, to be able to take that input, that feedback from other people, and either let them run with it or implement it yourself is a very, very positive quality. You mentioned before wanting to stay involved with the program side, but also having to deal with the like administration. So how do you maintain your vision of what you want to achieve while you're dealing with the administrative realities? How do you delegate without losing oversight? How does that day-to-day process look for you in your organization?
You know, there's on one hand, you can let some things slide, right?
Hmm.
Like currently, I'm a couple of months behind on our QuickBooks, right? I need
Okay.
to update receipts, but I know this,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
there is not going to be any major failure because of that. So, what I try to be is deliberate about what I don't do. Right. And so if I know that I want to focus with the teachers on teacher training and curriculum development areas where I want to learn more, where our teachers don't necessarily have the time to investigate the things that I want to be investigating, I want to make a contribution so I can also be more engaged with what they're doing. Whenever I started this, I didn't know anything about teaching. I had no history in no background in education. So what I did is I went and got a master's degree in philosophy of education so I could understand the teachers and what they're going through more and understand the whole concept of education. And now I'm doing a doctorate in education. Right. And so, but at the same time, that means that there's something that I've got to not be doing. Right. And so some of the things that I'm not doing right now are I'm not doing deliberately. I will get caught up and I will find some help. A couple of days ago, I got an email from somebody saying I want to help, I want to be an intern. Well, that intern is going to come on and they're going to say, "Hey, I can do a little bit of the QuickBooks. I can do a little bit more of the record keeping. I can help you with social media." So, like what I try to be is deliberate with what I don't do, keep an eye on it, and then try to make advances in other areas.
It's another area of commonality between the both of us. We're both doing doctorates in education. So how do you find your your schooling applies to your day-to-day life? The reason why I ask is because as somebody who has 20 plus years in industry, I've found that my real world experience per se has a major influence on my success with my scholastic world. Like, my degrees have been made a lot easier because of the real world experience that I've had. The theory that we're talking about, for example, in some of our courses, I have experienced in reality, seen the changes, lived those experiences, and not just read about them in a textbook or read a case study. How do you feel about how your real world experience is either shaping your education or allowing you to navigate your education?
Yeah, so one of my favorite authors is John Dewey, right? And when you read Dewey, he's not the easiest person to read,
Mm.
actually. But and Paulo Freire, and I can drop a bunch of other names. But what I really like when reading about the theorists is, having done a lot of what they're talking about, it makes it feel like they're directly talking to me, right? And as well as they explain their concepts, and then I can relate back to them because of my lived experience, I think it makes it easier to understand what they're talking about. And then on the flip side of that, like when I go into academia, what academia has done for me is made me be, you know, very considerate, right? Like I now think more carefully about what I say, and that whole process of citing something, I now no longer want to make claims that I cannot back up. And I appreciate academia for that. I appreciate academia for the access to other people as well, because in lived experience, you can sometimes be on an island, especially as a lone administrator. But when you get the opportunity through academia to jump into and work with a group of people and work out a bunch of these super complex concepts, well, they're helping me. I have a peer group that I meet with on a regular basis, and I'm not afraid to say I don't understand. And what I don't understand, more than likely they do. And then they explain to me things that I don't get. I explain things to them. So it's a wonderful collaborative space. And I found that I need both. I thrive when I have access to both.
I definitely agree. So, yet another area of commonality. I feel like this is going to be a regular theme for us. I love the challenge of discovering how to implement those theories in reality. I really love that challenge. How do we take this complex, complex idea and operationalize it in reality to make a difference? And my focus is on organizational change. And so that's I've worked in private industry, and it's been very beneficial because I sort of unethically use my team as a testing ground for a lot of these things that I'm working through in my courses. But it's been a very positive experience. So I definitely agree. I love the cerebral side where you really get to think and reflect and ideate and deeply interrogate and introspect ideas. But I also love the practical side where you're really putting them, either where the rubber meets the road, and you get to see what works in different scenarios, and then, fiddle with things, pull levers and turn knobs to make them really sort of work in reality.
Well, and there's a big gap between what goes on in my head and what I can write about, right? So, like, I have these big ideas, and now in academia that I actually have to sit and try to explain them, it really makes me think in a whole different way. It makes me responsible for what I say and what I think. So if I can sit down and I'm not explaining it well on paper or on my laptop, it's because the idea has not been thought out as much as it probably should have been thought out before I started talking about it. So when I have to write 500 words on some topic and I get 30 words in and I go, oh, that was the entire idea, those 30 words, but I've got nothing else. So you
Yeah.
have to build on that. That really makes you responsible for what you say. And I really kind of hate it. It's absolutely awful in certain ways because it makes me think
Yeah.
wow, I haven't really thought through a lot of these things that I'm so excited about. But
Yeah.
yeah, it helps you expand.
I tend to eat with my eyes, idea wise, also. And, I have big ideas, and I know exactly, I know that feeling, sitting down and fleshing out an idea. And all of a sudden, I have a couple of sentences. And I'm like, okay, well, I said it, I did it, that's it. And then I have so much more to write to support it. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think are the most essential qualities in an individual when they need to navigate a cross-cultural partnership or relationship? You in Guatemala, the idiosyncrasies of working in the region with the people, maybe even down to the local region. And I ask because it's a fascinating corollary to things that people have to deal with in enterprise. I work at a global company and I have to interact cross-culturally very often. And what kind of qualities do you look for in people when for example, you have this intern coming on? What do you look for in those people that signal to you you're going to be successful doing this?
Well, so one of my favorite things, I look at other people to develop my personality, right? Because I understand that as an executive director, and I'm constantly on and I'm thinking and I'm trying things out and I potentially talk too much, right? And I potentially overwhelm conversations. What I really like when people listen, because I don't personally listen probably as well as I should. And so whenever I have an interaction, say with that intern, and that intern says to me, like, hey, can you explain this entire process or what's going on with your organization? And that person doesn't interrupt me and they don't stop me halfway through a sentence to explain what they're thinking, and they sit there and listen to the entire thing, then I go, wow, that is a person I can work with. And wow, now I have learned from that person because I want to be able to learn also from the people that I'm having these interactions with. And the co-founder of Long Way Home, he's a marvelous listener, and that's probably why we work so well together. We're 23 years into this, and it has a lot to do with the fact that he can and is really great at turning it off and going, hey, I'm going to listen to every single thing that you say before I speak. That's one of my favorite qualities. That's what I'm looking for, and that is somewhere where I can personally improve.
And do you feel like it's an important aspect of a person's qualities for success because not just waiting for your turn to speak, obviously the signal that you're not really listening, but do you feel like there's a cultural impact to sitting and doing that as well beyond just sort of an interpersonal impact?
And when you say cultural, do you mean like organizationally cultural, like?
Great question.
Yeah.
Good qualifier. Sure, we could take it from that mode as well. I also meant specifically working with like Guatemalans, like in the region. I meant both, yeah. Or I meant geographically first, but I'm curious to hear your answer about the culturally.
Yeah, what I've seen culturally, organizationally, is that if one person listens while they're in the room, then other people have a tendency to pick that up and say, I'm going to pick up the positive aspects of what's going on in the room in that moment. And if you get a whole bunch of people talking at one time, then a whole bunch of people talk at one time. But I really like that cultural aspect within an organization where people pick up on the positive side of what else is going on in the room. And I try to mirror that and do my best with that. Now, geographically, I have found that once again, what I have to do is try to understand to the best of my ability what is going on locally and understand the context. And so I've spent a lot of time getting to know people, right? Understanding them, understanding what's going on in their lives. And that's why I lived there for 17 years, right? That's why I stayed in Guatemala. That's why I went to all the weddings and birthday parties and everything that I was invited to so I could understand the nuance of the conversation, right? Because they are going to be making different references than I do. If you're learning Spanish in Colombia, their vocabulary is different than the Spanish you're going to be learning in Guatemala. And so if you could spend enough time listening and understanding the nuances within the language, and develops an understanding of the patterns in which the way that people are speaking, then you'll have a much better chance at positive communication. And I've spent a lot of time trying to enhance that positive communication.
One of the things that you talked about in your response just now struck me as interesting, and it's the power of building relationships. And that seems to be so fundamental across the conversations that I have with people on this podcast on so many different topics, from negotiation to organizational culture. An upcoming interview I have is with a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, about time and how time influences behavior and relationships. And at the core of all of these different things is relationships. And it sounds like, to me, that's a critical aspect, both from you mentioned the story about your principal and engaging in a relationship with the mayor. Can you tell me a little bit about the importance of building relationships for Long Way Home, both from the administrative side and also among your students, and how those relationships, you cultivate those relationships and carry them on like intergenerationally?
Well, going back and forth between the United States and Guatemala, like as a North American business person, I have a tendency to jump into conversations and launch, right? Like, in Guatemala, and whenever I'm interacting over chat, what I like about the Guatemalans, and one of my favorite things about the culture there, is the ability to build relationships. They don't start off a sentence with, "What is the answer to number 6 on this spreadsheet?" They say, "Good afternoon." So they can be the smallest things where you're humanizing each other again. Where I have a tendency to not want to spend the time to humanize because I have so many things to do, but it's actually more efficient to, whenever you're speaking to an employee, a coworker, that you go, "How are you doing?" And you mean it, right? Because I don't necessarily always want to build relationships. I have a lot of things I need to accomplish in one day. However, I've noticed that I'm failing in that, to a certain degree, because whenever I started Long Way Home and I had a lot more time and there wasn't the internet and I didn't have so much work to do, that I was really good at spending time with people and getting to know them. And now that we have a larger staff, and there is more work to do, I don't do as much of that. I don't say buenas tardes every single time I get on a chat. I don't ask every single person how they are doing and how their family's doing. And I think that I would be better off. And as I'm hearing myself saying this, I'm also realizing how important it is to continue to do that. That the next time that I go there, that I have lunch with the people that I'm working with, that I hear about their lives. And I think that that's really important. And I would like to, focus on that a lot more, because I think it makes for a more efficient business because of the personal relationships you can make within that space and the understanding that we develop.
I definitely agree. I think, it's interesting because this ties into an upcoming interview that I have, as I mentioned, and I'll hold off on some of those thoughts because it'll come out in that podcast. But you're absolutely right. The taking the time, front loading the effort to develop the relationship on the front end makes so much difference on the back end. And if I can share another story with you about Paraguay, there's a long story that I won't get into about how I wound up down there. But I suffice to say, I wound up down there, and I did my first semester of university down in Paraguay at the Universidad Americana in Asuncion. And I had maybe a year or two of high school Spanish. And let me tell you, that doesn't prepare you for the real. Donde está la biblioteca does not prepare you to enter a university level computer science course in Spanish. Okay. Yeah. It was probably one of the craziest experiences I've ever had. So on that very first day, Professor Tapia was going around the class asking our names and what we're interested in. And I mean, I was fumbling. Of course, like I didn't speak Spanish, and even now I speak Spanish, but it's very broken, and I can get by, but it's nowhere near where it's fluent. And so we were going around, and everybody in the class obviously knew I was the stuck out like a sore thumb. And what what I'll never forget, there are two experiences I'll never forget. One, on that very first day, multiple people came up to me from class, and immediately that day I was invited to multiple barbecues. Like, people want to create relationships. And I made friends down there. This was, I don't know how many years ago, over a decade ago, multiple decades ago, where I still talk to some of these people.
Yeah.
We don't speak like regularly, but on LinkedIn we're connected, and we have back and forth. That's one story that I'll never forget, is just that feeling of warmth and like the familial feeling of being included. And that's something I haven't found very often outside of, I used to live in another place in South America as well, in Brazil, and I felt the same kind of warmth down there as well. But it's something I've connected to a South American culture, probably Central American culture as well, but just sort of that like Latin culture in general. The other story that I will never forget is after being there for some months, we were connecting a projector to a computer to project something onto the wall. And people, there were like 3 or 4 of us struggling to figure out, like, where does the connector go? What's happening here? And I asked in Spanish, where is the signal coming from? And I didn't even think about saying it. I just sort of happened. And everybody there stopped and looked at me and were like, oh, so proud that I was able to like have that moment. And it gives me goosebumps now that I'm talking about it. But just that feeling of the relationship amongst people is something that I have not found in many other places. And I think it's really special.
Yeah. And, and even on the backside of it, like, now that I'm moving so fast and trying to do so much with so many people, I am closer to the backside of all these relationships because I did front load it and did become friends with a lot of people. And now, as we're talking, I am going to go back and have lunch with everybody. I'm going to focus on those relationships because the thing is that they're extending it, right? It is part of what they do every day, as part of their lives. And then when I don't return it, I can even imagine that that's like kind of a cold hand. And what that might feel like to somebody who does that on a regular basis, then doesn't receive it back.
I can attest to that. So for me, my personal style is when I write to people on Slack, for example, if I'm instant messaging or an email, I always start with a hope you're well, happy Friday, how are you? It's very simple. It's not like I don't generally ask, how's the family doing? Sometimes I do, but it's always like a greeting of some sort. Hey, hope you're well, happy Friday, good to talk to you. And then I ask a question or something. Yeah. And that's just part of who I am as a person. Yeah. But when somebody doesn't do that, and it's the first time I've heard from them in a few weeks, and immediately there's no greeting, or it's just a question, how do I do this, or where do I go for this? I feel it, I see it, I recognize it, and in my own little way, I respond with, "Oh, hey, hope you're doing well. How are you?" And then I'll give the answer. So I will do that. But I do feel it when you're that way, culturally or just personably, and then somebody doesn't reciprocate it, you can feel it. I agree.
Yeah.
So talking about that a little bit, how do you maintain your team's motivation and commitment through those little setbacks, those little barriers, those little slights? I'm sure that they run into it in a lot of different areas. How do you maintain motivation to keep going? Because the Long Way Home Foundation project is so important. And I'm sure that there are a lot of roadblocks and struggles to overcome. It's not an organization that's massively well funded. It's really a grassroots organization. There's a lot of passion that's required. How do you maintain that motivation in that particular environment?
I don't know why, but my motivation does not wane. I have this thing called righteous indignation, right? And having spent so much time there and knowing how other people are living and knowing how much more difficult other people's lives are, the very second that I start to feel like, oh, that's not fair, or oh, it's not going well, I think about all the people that are, in a position where they can't really do much better. And then I snap right back real quick, right? And I go back to, I am lucky every single second that I have a roof over my head, I have a faucet to get water from, I have a vehicle, I have so much. And so that is what, moment to moment, which I think may have driven some other people out of this, is, I have a constant reminder that I am lucky to have what I have. And then, like, as far as the rest of the team goes, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Simon Bolivar, right? He
Mm.
rode at the head of the column. That didn't work out for him very well,
Right.
but he also did lead, and people got the point. And that is something that I do for the rest of the team that we've heard, a lot of other people say in the past as well, is I try to make sure that if there is the hardest thing that anybody has to do, that I do it first. And even, 23 years into this, I haven't stopped doing that. I raffled my car in order to get the organization going. And, I don't brag about it or anything, but the people around me know that I'm willing to do that. We recently did a construction job and I took the hardest job. The hardest job is running the mixer, right? So
Mm.
that means you're taking the gravel, the sand, the cement, and everything, and you're dumping it into the mixer. And if you do that for 8 hours a day, it is one heck of a heavy job, right? And I think that, not a lot of executives expect that they're going to be the ones that go out and do those heavy, super difficult jobs. And what I really want is for the people around me to see me doing that, to go, okay, he's still with us. He does not
Mm.
find himself above and beyond any of the tasks that we have to do. If he's going to do it, and I think that makes the rest of the team feel like I'm not disconnected, that I'm
Yeah.
willing to do every single thing that I ask anybody else to do, and I try to have done it first. And I think
Yeah.
that keeps those, those little disconnected moments, that ties them right back together whenever, there's any discontinuity within our team. I think that helps.
Leading from the front is so crucial. I definitely agree with you. And I've gotten feedback from my own team about how meaningful it is to jump in and help out hands on, from a leader. In a way, it makes me sad because it signals to me that they've had experiences where people don't do that,
Yeah.
and it's always been part of my nature to do that. And you mentioned gratitude, to be grateful for all the things that you have. I'll tell you this. I grew up in an upper middle class. A little bit about my background, people don't really know. I grew up in upper middle class in Los Angeles, and I had a pretty comfortable upbringing. And then I moved to South America. And the story that my mom tells is when I first came back, the first words that I spoke when I got off the airplane, she took me to a Starbucks to get a coffee in the airport. And I came out of the restroom and I said, "Thank God for flushing toilets."
Right.
And ever since that experience was so formative, I have had a different level and color to gratitude. And it's been it's really was a life-changing experience. It's something that, while I don't necessarily wish upon anybody else to experience poverty in order to get gratitude or have the gratitude for what they have, people need to experience the fact that other people do have that level and really count their blessings. Because here in the United States, for the most part, there are pockets here in the States, but at least in the United States or in the developed, quote unquote developed world, we really do have it very, very lucky.
Yeah, and that I carry around. Like, I've been back from Guatemala from my last construction project and trip. I've been back since Monday, and I've gone to the faucet probably 36 times, and every single time before I touch the faucet to turn the water on, I hesitate, because I
Mm,
think, like, what if something splashes and gets in another cup, and then it's going to be cross contaminated? So I think about every drop of water that comes out, because I also know that I have to sometimes in Guatemala use a bucket from the neighbor's house to go get water, that I have to be careful with all of that. And so, like, all of that translates back into the increments in my life as I live in the United States, and makes me, not have a lot of moments of not feeling extraordinarily motivated to keep doing this and doing it as well as I possibly can.
Yeah, gratitude is a huge motivator. That's so true. And so what a great message. You talked a little bit about in our pre-interview the four agreements, and I have to admit I've actually never read the four agreements, despite the fact that it was on my bookshelf, and I may have claimed to people that I've read it in the past, but I've never read it before. So seeing those four agreements is really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about why being impeccable with your word, not taking things personally, not making assumptions, and always doing your best, why do those speak to you so specifically?
Well, when you're interacting with other people, and when you're the executive director and you're dealing with employees, it's really important what you say and how you say it, right? And then also whenever things come back your way, because like, always do your best. That's pretty simple, and it sounds like you could always do your best, but it's not so terribly easy to always do your best. And when you come up with moments where you're like, I'm going to do this a little bit, that simple motion of saying it and thinking it, drives me from 75% potentially all the way back to 100. And then that don't take things personally is a really good one as well, right? Because in the heat of the moment, in interactions with a variety of people on a variety of topics, we're all trying to figure it out, right? Nobody has the full playbook on how you do all of this. And especially in the nonprofit grassroots development work in Latin America, when we're all trying to figure everything out, there's a lot of room for error there. And so, whenever people get frustrated or it gets a little bit heated, it wouldn't be hard to take things personally. And I can't believe that person's talking to me that way. And the best relationships I've had as far as business goes has been with, whenever we can get a little bit heated and then we walk away from it and go, okay, well, that was about that topic, but that does not necessarily have anything to do with the next topic. Let's drop it. Let's move on. Let's keep going. Let's push through. Whatever happened at that moment doesn't necessarily, have anything to do with anything else. Don't make assumptions, right? Those could be so dangerous whenever you think you know what somebody meant, or you think you're assuming across the board. Like, these things are easy to say and they're easy to read, but it takes a lot of practice. And there's a deliberate, you have to be deliberate with these concepts and practice them in such a way that you can continue to have good interactions with your team members. And so, being impeccable with your words. There's a lot of extra words out there. I obsess over this word just. Like, if you could just do this thing for me, that's a little passive aggressive, right? So if I ask one of my coworkers, can you just fill out this spreadsheet? That can be a little rude. It can be a little passive aggressive, instead of saying there's a big difference between can you just do this spreadsheet and can you do this spreadsheet, right? And so there's all these little words that we can you have you actually looked at this spreadsheet is way different than have you looked at this spreadsheet. There's these little connector words that we live with, that if you can keep an eye on the way that you use them, I think that can make a big difference as well in how we interact with each other. And of course, for me, it has to start with me. And I occasionally slip, but I'm pretty sure I haven't used the word just in like 4 or 5 years.
Really?
Yeah. And it's made
That's
a
pretty.
huge difference.
I love that. I've recognized that about the word just as well. Another one that I use is when I say that's actually a good idea, right?
Right.
I say that actually quite. I just said it right now. I say that quite often, as a
Kind of
matter of
rude.
fact. Yeah, and it's a rude way to say it, and I stop myself and I say that is a good idea, right? I don't mean to imply that I'm surprised that you had a good idea,
Yeah.
So I've seen that for myself, and I think that's such a good challenge to oneself. In my field, one thing that I've challenged my team with before is, and again, this is the importance of language. Another area where I think we align so closely and so interesting is I've challenged my team not to use the word should, but use the word will,
Mm-hmm.
right? So instead of that should work, to say that will work, and approaching it, just that little shift makes a big difference in how you're approaching something, how much research is going into it, how much expertise has gone into it, how much testing has gone into it, etc. Just making those small shifts, they make a huge impact. So I really respect that self challenge, and the fact that I'm sorry that I've caused you to use the word just multiple times and you've broken your sobriety on that one. I
Yeah.
apologize.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's for me, it's more of a concept. Really, the word, I don't have any problem with the word. It's the concept that I'm trying to address in the same way that absolutes are a concept. Or
Mm-hmm.
let's work on this spreadsheet. And you say let's whenever you don't want to do it, but you hope
Right.
somebody else does. And then it's, sort of been, thrown off into the distance and then nobody
Yeah.
gets to it, that's what being impeccable with your words means to me, is taking personal responsibility for how I communicate with people.
That's a great mindset. I love that. I'm going to take these. I will eventually read the four agreements. I'm a big reader, and I definitely want to add it to the list now. Definitely might be one of those as well. One of those words. Um, let me ask you about, what does the future hold for Long Way Home? Like, what is the next major phase? What projects are you working on now? Where do you see the organization going? What hopes do you have?
Yeah, things are exciting. They're okay. It's making me hesitate. I can't even say it. I get so excited when I think about what I'm about to say that it makes it almost difficult to say, right? So we built this whole campus. We have 178 students on our campus. We have 25 teachers. We have green builders. We have the whole thing set up. And we have a little history behind us, and we have a good reputation in our town. We're starting to build up some partnerships. So, like, rather than us having to raise money for everything that we want to actually do, we're working with ecohab.org, and they're helping us build classrooms. Engineers Without Borders, they are doing the water projects. Terra Firma Floors is building floors for families. They're raising all the money for these projects. So we can expand more if anybody's listening and would like to do some development work, but doesn't want to move to Guatemala, build an entire staff in order to accomplish some of this philanthropic work. Of course, we're available now because we have established the trust of the people in this town. That takes a long time and a lot of money. Where are we going from there? Well, the next big step that is related to my work in academia is that, so whenever we were building our campus, we had all these green building structures that we were working on. And then we've been integrating that into the actual lesson plans for each of the grades, for all of the subject matter. And so what that is going to mean, because what I want to do is scale this whole poverty fighting thing up, right? We've got all these people on staff and we're fighting a lot of poverty right now. And maybe we're getting to, 10,000 people a year, but how do you get to 1 million, right? How do you scale that up? And the way that we're going to scale that up is that we're going to give those lesson plans to the other teachers at the other public schools. So because they don't actually have lesson plans, it will be a benefit to them to receive our lesson plans, and they'll use them because it will make their lives easier. We don't have to put them on staff for them to be able to do that. And then we will have the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, and 11th graders in our town using our poverty fighting lesson plans. And then we can scale from 250 people doing it that we are now to 5,000 people, basically with one small, I mean, it's a fairly big step, but compared to everything else that we've been doing, it's a fairly small step. that's where we're headed. Is we're going to be the first organization that I know of that is working with the public school district and involving students at other public schools in fighting poverty.
That is an incredible next phase for the organization. And, having students be involved more than just a periodic volunteer day, for example, is a huge shift in a strategy like that. And that's pretty amazing. Are you excited about what the future holds for those young people who are growing up with that curriculum and what that might mean for poverty in the area?
I mean, on one hand, I'm really excited for the people that won't be living in poverty. Of course, that means that they won't spend their lives collecting water, that they won't suffer because they're, inhaling smoke indoors. On the other hand, can you imagine a generation of students who have spent their formative years fighting poverty in their area, becoming world leaders in the sense that it's not happening in a lot of other places? How will that affect politics? How many politicians will emerge from several thousand students having spent their formative years dedicated to supporting their society? That's what I'm excited about. That can shift the wave of politics, that the wave of, how people are treating each other and what they expect from each other. It can go beyond our town as well, because if some other town hears that poverty was eradicated and that the primary, middle, and high school students did it, and that it didn't come at a major extra cost either, and it improved the lives of the teachers and students and every, who's going to want to not do it?
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
It's very exciting to think of the smiles on the faces of the people who have had that, who have done that for that many years in a row. It'll last the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. It's the kind of legacy that anybody would be proud to leave. And my big critique of politics today, one of many, is people don't enter civic service for a civic reason anymore. They enter civil service because they want some kind of personal gain, and it's in power. And for generalizing, of course, but that's what we see, unfortunately, in general at the highest levels of power, especially the ones that are most visible now here in the States. There's people don't enter this civil service for the civics of it, and it's really detrimental to society as a whole. And hearing you talk about educating young people, an up-and-coming generation, with a societal lens that, it is something beyond yourself, right? It's transcendental. That's one of the most important, I think, one of the most important components of any education, I think, any learning is, transfer that knowledge to something, either to another, endeavor, but also do something beyond yourself. Do something for the good of other people. And I think more people need to do that. And it's amazing to hear how Long Way Home is starting that process now, and starting in the schools, which is really incredible.
Well, what's really cool is what we don't know yet, right? Mm-hmm. What will emerge from that space? We haven't the slightest idea. As academics, we're both into some theory right now, so we can theorize. As you can hear the change in my voice, I get really excited about what the theoretical possibilities are of what emerges from a whole bunch of people who have engaged in that process for an extended period of time. I kind of wish I could push the clock up 15 years from now to see exactly where all this is headed. Something a statistic that I saw that I was reading through was prior to the American education system being centralized, it was all very rural, and people worked with education systems based on what was going on in their community. There was a correlation between that, and there was 98% voting whenever that was happening, because people were directly involved in what was going on in their communities. The education reflected on what was going on in their communities. We then centralized the education system, and voting went from 97% to 50% or 40, it plummeted, right? So there is a way to build that back up. There is a way to build that civic engagement, that voting, that democratic process that could work to strengthen communities. And I'm also, and that's pretty well the title of my dissertation, is how do you build up democratic education to strengthen communities, and start off with 7th grade social studies classes, because why not?
I can't wait to this isn't something that I've frequently said, but I can't wait to read the dissertation, and I can't wait to read in the future, come 10, 15 years, the case study or the book that comes from this grand experiment that is very, very successfully being executed. So, Matt, I mean, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want people to know? Do you want to call anything out? Talk to us a little bit about what you have going on in the future, where you want people to get involved.
Well, we are looking for one donor to pay for that process, and we're not talking about a lot of money. So if anybody happens to think this is a great idea, please contact me at matt@lwhome.org. Right. And then, of course, we're on all the socials. You can find us on Instagram, because there's imagery that is attached to all of this. And the imagery is kind of better, than anything else. It really, a picture with us is truly worth 1,000 words. And also, if anybody wants to volunteer, if there are teachers out there who are like, I want to get involved in this revolutionary process of working with kids in poverty, well, we need teachers and consultants and green builders and volunteers. There is room for everybody in this process, because although, we're saying a lot of things, what I'm most interested in is what I don't know. It's what you know. It's what everybody else out there knows. And there's a lot of room to grow with us. And I want to explore with people. So if you want to explore and have fun doing it, let's go.
Couldn't end the podcast any better way. Matt, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on with me. I'm so excited to evangelize for Long Way Home and keep on doing an amazing work, because the mission is absolutely incredible, and I'm so excited to see where this goes.
And we could not do this without you. So I really appreciate you putting the word out there. That is what we struggle with the most. And thank you.
We'll do our very best. Thank you so much, Matt. Talk to you soon.
Take care.